Hello, my dear students. Today we will talk about the chemical energy and the ATP and what happens inside the cell to get and use this energy. Our key concept is all cells need chemical energy. Yes, for sure. The main ideas, the chemical energy used for most cell processes is carried by ATP. We will study the formation of ATP. Organisms break down carbon-based molecules to produce ATP. Then a few types of organisms do not need sunlight and photosynthesis as a source of energy, and we will study this and what is the name of the process itself. Let's start. The chemical energy used for most cell processes is carried by ATP. Sometimes you may feel that you need energy, so that you eat the food that contains sugar. Does food which contains sugar and other carbon-based molecules give you energy? Actually, the answer to this question is yes and no. It gives you the energy, yes, but in an indirect way. Okay, all of the carbon-based molecules in food store chemical energy in their bonds. Carbohydrates and lipids are the most important energy sources in the foods that you eat. However, this energy is only usable after these molecules are broken down by a series of chemical reactions. The food you get is digested first, broken down in your digestive system in order to get the energy that you need. Your energy does come from the food, yes, but not directly. All cells use chemical energy carried by ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate. ATP is a molecule that transfers energy from the breakdown of food molecules to cell processes. Okay, you can think of ATP as a wallet filled with money. Just as the wallet carries money that you can spend, ATP carries the chemical energy that the cells can use. Cells use ATP for functions such as building molecules, moving materials by active transport. Yes, the energy carried by ATP is released when a phosphate group is removed from the molecule. We will see the composition of the ATP in the next slide. ATP had three phosphate groups. This is why we said adenosine triphosphate. Tri means three. So ATP has three phosphate groups, but the bond holding the third phosphate group is unstable and is very easily broken. So the removal of the third phosphate group usually involves a reaction that releases the energy that the cells need. Here is the ATP and the ADP. This is the adenosine group and these are the three phosphate groups. So this is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Tri means three, while this is the adenosine group and these are two phosphate groups. This is why it is named diphosphate. This is ADP, have only two phosphate groups. So when the phosphate is removed, energy is released and the ATP becomes ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate. ADP is a lower energy molecule that can be converted into ATP. How? By the addition of a phosphate group. If ATP is a wallet filled with money, so ADP is a nearly empty wallet. Adding a phosphate group to ADP to make it ATP is not a simple process. Actually, a large complex group of proteins is needed to do this, to add the phosphate group. If just one of these proteins is faulty or made by mistake, ATP is not produced. The breakdown of ATP to ADP and the production of ATP from the previous ADP can be represented by this cycle. As you can see here, we have on the top the adenosine triphosphate. This is the energy molecule or the energy carrying molecule. When the phosphate group is released, we obtain the energy released for the cell's function. Then by a complex processes, so it turns into ADP, adenosine diphosphate. By complex processes, while you are getting food and breaking down the food, adding the phosphate groups back again to the adenosine diphosphates, then it will turn into ATP once again. So this is like a cycle. Do you remember the wallet example? So ATP, this is a wallet filled with money. When the phosphate group is released, this is like spending the money. It turns into the empty wallet ADP. When the empty wallet ADP, then you get food, the energy from breaking down of molecules. The phosphate group is added, then the wallet is filled again with money. Okay, organisms that break down carbon-based molecules to produce ATP. The foods that you eat do not contain ATP that your cells can use directly. First, the food must be digested, the food must be broken down. One function of digestion is to break down food into smaller molecules that can be used to make ATP. One function of digestion is breaking down the food into smaller particles that can be used to make ATP. You probably know that different foods have different amounts of calories. We all talk about calories now, which are the measure of energy. Calories are the measure, a calorie is a measure of energy. So different foods have different amounts of calories, okay? So different foods also provide different amounts of ATP. The number of ATP molecules are made from the breakdown of food is related to the number of calories in food, but not directly. Listen, the number of ATP molecules produced depend on the type of molecule that is broken, whether it is carbohydrate, lipid, or protein. Let's see. Carbohydrates are not stored in large amounts in your body. These are the sugars, but they are the molecules most commonly broken down to make ATP, okay? The breakdown of a simple sugar like glucose yields about 36 molecules of ATP. This is great. You might be surprised to learn that carbohydrates do not provide the largest amount of ATP. Okay, this is strange, but look at this. Lipids store the most energy. In fact, the fats store about 80% of the energy in your body. And then, when fats are broken down, they yield the most ATP. Look at this table. Carbohydrates, in a milligram of carbohydrates, it yields only 4 calories. Proteins also, 1 milligram of protein give us 4 calories. While lipids, the 1 milligram produces 9 calories. So lipids and fats store the most ATP. For example, a typical triglyceride can be broken down to make about 146 molecules of ATP. Proteins store about the same amount of energy as carbohydrates, but they are less likely to be broken down to make ATP. Yes, if the cell have the choice to break down carbohydrates and the proteins, it will break down carbohydrates. Why? They give the same amount of energy, but the proteins, the amino acids that the cell break down to make ATP, they are needed to build new proteins more than they are needed for energy. So the cells would rather get the energy from breaking down carbohydrates than breaking down proteins. Plant cells also need ATP, but plants do not eat food the way the animals must. The plants make their own food. Through the process of photosynthesis, the plants absorb energy from sunlight and make sugars. In the process of photosynthesis, the plant cells break down these sugars to produce ATP, just as the animal cells do. Okay, but we have a few types of organisms that do not need sunlight and photosynthesis as a source of energy. Most organisms rely directly or indirectly on sunlight and photosynthesis as their source of chemical energy, but some organisms do not need sunlight. How? In places that never get sunlight, such as the deep ocean, there are areas with living things. How come? Let's see. Some organisms live in very hot water near cracks in the ocean floor, called hydrothermal vents. The hydrothermal vents, these vents release chemical compounds such as sulfides that can serve as an energy source. Then we come to a process named chemosynthesis. Chemosynthesis is like photosynthesis, but chemosynthesis uses the chemical energy instead of sunlight energy in order to produce food. Chemosynthesis is a process by which some organisms use chemical energy instead of the light energy to make energy storing carbon based molecules. However, these organisms still need ATP for energy. The processes that make their ATP are very similar to those in other organisms. Like plants, chemosynthetic organisms make their own food, but in a different process. It is the raw materials that differ. In photosynthesis, it uses the energy from sunlight, but in chemosynthesis, it uses the chemical energy in chemical compounds like sulfides. I hope you understood and enjoyed this episode. See you in the next one. Be safe. Thank you. Goodbye.